Thank you. So without further ado, we would like to start the session for this afternoon. So the session Migration, Development and the SDGs, and the first plenary titled Remittances as a Lever to the SDGs, How to Multiply the Effects Through Enabling Policies. So a gentle reminder for the questions and answers, please use your app, but put your phone on silent mode. That would be really appreciated. So it is with great pleasure that I would like to introduce the moderator, Mr. Rajeev Kumar Gupta. He's the head of Regional Financial Inclusion Program at the United Nations Capital Development Fund, UNCDF. The distinguished panelists today are Robin Newman, head of Policy and Capital Building, Alliance for Financial Inclusion, INAFI. Muthukumarasamy Kalyanasundaram is the CEO, International Network of Alternative Financial Institutions, INAFI, in India. And Ismail Iqbal, Deputy Secretary, Ministry of Overseas Pakistani and Human Resources Development, Pakistan. So now, I am pleased to invite all the speakers and moderators to be on stage, and I will pass the session to the moderator. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. A challenge, huh? So one thing is good that we're not between your lunch, but the other challenge is between lunch and dozing off in the school. So this session is quite interesting, and I really like this topic at all. We have for the past 2.5 days been discussing about global trends, diaspora investments, social impact investment, rural investments, innovation, blockchain, market development policies, public-private people partnership. But all of this for what? And that's where we are trying to see how remittances contributes to transforming the world. How remittances contributes to no one being left behind. One family at a time. And that's where, as an individual, as a household, as an enterprise, private sector, public sector, we all have been saying how we can achieve the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that we have. 169 targets, around 304 indicators. And that's there only in 10.C that talks about reducing remittance costs. But there are various ways that remittance and leveraging it towards formal financial inclusion contributes to a lot of the other SDGs. And that's what we're going to discuss today. Of what kind of policies, what can government do, what private sector needs to do. And for that, we have a very distinguished panel members here. Let me introduce them one by one. On my left, we have Mr. Muthukumarasamy Kalyanasundaram. Yes, in short, Kalyan. In South India, we have long names. He is the CEO of International Network of Alternative Financial Institutions, in short, INAFI, India, and has been working a lot with development NGOs. So the whole community perspective, whole development perspective is what he brings to the table. And these development NGOs have been working on financial inclusion. So he has been advancing financial inclusion for the past 3 decades, and he's been a commercial banker for 2 decades. And now he interacts with the government, the central bankers, and the commercial bankers on various policies and bringing the community, the development aspect, and integrating that in the policies. On left of Mr. Kalyan is Mr. Robin Newnham. He is the head of Policy and Capacity Building, Alliance for Financial Inclusion. is responsible for policy support to AFI members from more than 90 developing and emerging countries who are members of AFI. He also has an oversight responsibility of the training courses that AFI does. And for that, you have held various positions in United Kingdom Treasury. And on left of Mr. Robin is Mr. Muhammad Ismail Iqbal, Deputy Secretary, Immigration, Ministry of Overseas, Pakistanis and Human Resource Development. He has been performing the role of policy formulation for intending immigrants as well as welfare of overseas Pakistanis and their families living in Pakistan. And he has been intensively working on formalizing remittances, investment opportunities, and he has had a long stint also with the Ministry of Industries and Production, and a lot of work on skills that you have been undertaking. So apart from that, I recently watched, I don't know how many of you watched the recent Avengers movie. How many of you have watched the Avengers movie? So after watching that, I was thinking everybody of us has a superpower, right?
Yes.
It's not that only those 5 or 10 have it. So I was asking my panel members what their superpower is. So Mr. Kalyan has the superpower of connecting with the community members very easily. He doesn't have a barrier. He can directly connect with the communities. Robin, well, he is open to any kind of food globally, right from insects to the cuisine that you can think about. And Mr. Iqbal, he is willingly, his superpower is he trusts everyone. So we all have some superpowers in our own self. Thank you all for joining. And this being on Sustainable Development Goals, the question is, how do you link remittances and leveraging remittances for formal financial inclusion, and how that can accelerate achieving other SDGs? And that is where I would request panel members to talk about a bit about your organization and how you see which are the SDGs that you can link remittances and financial inclusion to. So I can start with Mr. Kalyan.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Rajeev. Let me thank IFARD for having me here and also giving me the opportunity to share with you what we do with the migrant workers in India. We represent INAFI is a network of development NGOs. They're all basically development NGOs. The whole spectrum of development work, health, education, livelihoods, and many. One among the work, now we all know there's a common understanding globally. Financial inclusion is an important instrumentality to achieve the development outcomes. So then that goes an extension now to the SDG, which is an expression of the global aspiration on the development outcomes. So this is basically a civil society work with the bottom of the pyramid. Our members work with the migrant workers at the bottom of the pyramid. If you like, mostly unskilled workers. So that's what, so one of the development work is this, improving the living standards of the migrant workers and using the remittances effectively for that particular, achieving the development outcomes and the whole range of the development work, which is contextually relevant. And then relating with the SDGs, that I will come to a little later. Then a brief about my context. India, of course, most of you are familiar, and India is all about big data, both from the latest buzz perspective and also from the economic and financial perspectives. India is about big data, and this is, the migration and remittance is no exception. Out of 200 million, about 30 million diaspora all over the globe, not just in one country, spread all over the globe. And that is one. What is known outside, not known outside much, is the internal diaspora. This is outbound. Internal diaspora is very, India is a subcontinental proportion, continental proportion. So the migration inside, I myself is a migrant, internal migrant, moved out of my hometown for opportunities. So the internal migration is very huge. And our work largely relates with the internal. I'll come to that about one. So this is the this Indian context, and if you look at the profile of the migrants of Indian migrants, there are huge outbound migrants. There are skilled and unskilled workers are there. The skilled diaspora, we have every year a diaspora conference in India itself. The skilled diaspora, of course, they themselves are part of, they are remitters, and they are also part of the remittance channel themselves. Because most of the skilled workers, they run banks, they are startups in IT, they run a lot of MTOs, MNOs, they are part of the ecosystem, they themselves are the remittance as well as the remittance ecosystem itself is being developed. So we don't work with them, there is no need for them. So we work with those part of the pyramid where there is a huge need for them to really realize the full potential of the remittance. And the remittance is not lost in the channel, reaches the home safely. And that's where our INAFI members, we all work at the bottom of the pyramid. That means most of our focus is on the domestic itself. There is a huge potential to work with these numbers. As I said, big data, 30 millions, and India is continuously receiving huge amount of money, internal about 70 billions, continuously it's going on. Then internal migration, that data is more than this. How much remittance is there in that kind of a. So what's really happened in India, these are the exciting times. This is one side on the demand side, these are migrant workers. In developing the remittance, the payment systems, remittance and the payment ecosystems, these are really exciting times. Being a big country with a diverse, hugely diverse population, culture, and other things, we can't have one kind of a size-fits-all solution. We have huge options now. In fact, the regulation and the government responding to this need of the migration, different segments of migration, it's tremendous. In fact, they are ahead of the curve, I would say even. That's what, including in the digital space and also in the physical space, that has happened. So this is the scenario in Indian context. Very briefly, I will now touch upon some of the, as I started saying, the remittance, the clear link as an instrumentality is a tool for financial inclusion. And then financial inclusion as in, because remittance is one part of the financial service. We as a network, as a members, we talk about the whole spectrum of financial service for the migrant workers. Savings, credit, payment remittances, insurance and pension. So this is where our work is focused. Along with this, most important, our work will be sharing that. Financial literacy is a very critical part of this part of the pyramid. Because what we found that there is a kind of intimidation. When I say intimidation, the migrant workers totally cut off from the mainstream remittance channels. They were only in the informal remittance channels. So the kind of work that is going on, migrating them from the informal remittance channels to the formal channels is a big work, and that we are doing it, and there is a great strides have been made. That itself has saved a lot of money, remittance money, which is otherwise lost in the transit from the destination to the home. So when we talk about these remittances, we discuss a lot about the convenience, the cost, and one more thing, then the speed. But here the most important thing what we realize for this money is the safety. Safety first. Because so much money has been lost in the process of remittance. So this is where the policies and actions. So our members mostly, we are all enabling players. We are not into delivery. They are not part of the remittance channel. what we do, we connect these migrant workers with the remittance channels, be it banks, wherever the banks are not well networked or they don't have footprints in the remote regions, we connect with the MTOs, we connect with the MNOs. I will now briefly, one or two breakthroughs which were quite interesting for you. I will come back again on other work, what we did with the SDGs. On the instrumentality of financial inclusion, what we said, migrating from the informal channel to regular channel. Indian context, it is a bank is the fulcrum. Bank is the pivot for the financial inclusion. That's what the design, the country as a whole, we chose it. So what we really have been doing, connecting with the bank. But one of the big barrier for these connecting with the regular, the regulated channel is the bank is, a lot of procedural barriers were there. So one breakthrough, which is an enabling policy, which we have been trying to, we did it was the identity. The Aadhaar, you might have heard about it, but more than the Aadhaar also, the identity at the home place, and that helped it to have an account with the bank. This is a big breakthrough in terms of policy. I think most of you, this is the one takeaway, giving the identity to migrant work. I'm talking about the bottom of the pyramid. This is very critical, identity, and that has opened the banking system to them to have an account. So this is one big breakthrough. The next big revolution happened, and now it started happening, is the mobile. Somebody talked about one question, very relevant question asked one of the sessions, connectivity. That's a big problem. It's a country with a huge geography. The connectivity, the internet connectivity, we talk about so much about digital. What really happened in India was there is a huge connectivity problem. Of course, Rajeev may be also knowing it. So when there is no internet connectivity, so we have not been able to do, connect them with this. But there is a revolution happening, mobile. The mobile revolution is one of the biggest revolution in India. So that has really transformed this completely. What has really done was, instead of internet, there is a mobile phone operators, MNOs. That connectivity is better than the internet connectivity. So we worked the policy, then we will come out with a mobile solution, which is completely independent of the internet. It is only riding on the mobile network, which is far better. This is another revolution. So this way, this connectivity regulated channel was great. This is what some of the great work, which is the strides, which has helped them. The money safely reaches itself a big task. This is what we have been able to achieve in India in some of these. Let me come back on these FI, what I've achieved in terms of savings and insurance, and also most importantly, today is this one, SDGs as we go along. And how the SDG outcomes now we are able to achieve through the instrument, to the remittances tool, through the instrumentality of financial inclusion. Some of the outcomes already we are seeing and we are experiencing, that I'll be able to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, for this. So that's interesting, how you talk about safety, identity itself is kind of bringing in quality. That's also one of the SDG goals. Robin, over to you in terms of INAFI and the other SDG goals that you think remittance contributes towards achievement of, please.
Thank you very much, Rajeev. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And thanks, first of all, to the organizers for inviting me to be part of this great panel. Now, by way of brief background, as Rajeev has already mentioned, I'm coming from the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. You have heard from a couple of my colleagues, I think, in the last 2 days in this conference. We're representing central banks and financial regulators from more than 90 developing and emerging countries globally, with the headquarters based upstairs in this building hosted by Bank Negara Malaysia. And our members are all working on policies to advance financial inclusion in their countries, which in turn, of course, makes a very significant contribution to various of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we support our members through various modalities of peer learning, capacity building, in-country implementation, and also mobilizing specific commitments and targets from the membership under the framework known as the Maya Declaration. And some of those targets indeed relate specifically to cross-border digital payment services. And although we do not have a specific dedicated remittances working group or program, it's a topic that we see a lot of strong linkages to broader financial inclusion. And so our digital financial services working group has been working on guidance for regulators on how to scale up and catalyze growth in digital cross-border payments. Also at the regional level, Africa Regional Initiative, which is Sub-Saharan Africa is probably the region of the world where cross-border payments remain the highest cost, well above the global average. So that's a strong area of focus. And recently we've also started quite a bit of work looking at financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons. And we've seen the numbers are rising each year of refugees and FDPs, and they have a strong need to make use of remittances, both while they're on their journey as refugees, but also when they're received into host countries too. So with that introduction, let me turn specifically to the topic of our panel on the linkages of remittances, financial inclusion, and the SDGs. And I think you saw the very striking figures in the video just now on the impact that remittances can have, and I think that's an important context for looking at the linkages to SDGs. So 258 million migrants, sending back almost $500 billion to low and middle income countries each year, treble the amount of total overseas development assistance. And we know that around 75% of that is used for consumption and day-to-day expenditure, but 25% is invested in productive enterprises and savings. So just right there, that's a huge potential sum that can be used to contribute to various development goals, including those that are central to the SDGs. So because of that, it's not surprising that there's linkages really between remittances and almost all of the SDGs, and IFAD, amongst others, has done a good job in documenting that. But I'd like to focus just now on 4 of them that I believe are pretty central and would like to highlight. Let's go number 1, ending poverty. Go number 5, gender equality. Number 10, which is reducing inequality at the macro national level. And 15, which is climate action. And I'll just say a little bit about the linkages within each of those 4 before I finish. So firstly, go number 1, ending poverty. Of course, it's the bedrock, really, of all the other sustainable development goals. And you can see that the sums involved in global remittances can make a huge contribution to that. We saw that for the 800 million families globally that are receiving remittances. On average, those remittances are making up 60% of their household income. So that's a huge opportunity to lift many of those families above the poverty line, but also to save funds that can be used to cushion against future shocks and prevent slipping back into poverty. And I think the issue of the cost reduction is really relevant there, because we still have the global average cost stuck at around 7% for the last 2 years. If that can be reduced to the 3% SDG target, that will free up an additional $20 billion a year that goes straight into the hands of the lowest income households in rural areas in developing countries. So that's a huge amount of funds that can contribute to goal number 1 of ending poverty. If we look at goal number 5, which is gender equality, this is a very big issue within the whole financial inclusion field. There is a persistent gender gap in financial inclusion. The latest World Bank Findex data that just came out a couple of years ago showed that there's been a persistent 9 percentage point gender gap between men's and women's access that hasn't budged at all in the last 6 years. So that's a really big concern. As INAFI, we really put a lot of emphasis into identifying policies and regulations that might start to have an impact in closing that gap in areas around identity, collateral laws, and socio-cultural factors as well. And remittances could have an important role in gender equality. There have been some interesting studies in this area. One looking at Nepal showed that when women themselves were migrants, the funds that they were sending back, a higher proportion of those funds were used for education and healthcare spend, which are contributing to the SDGs. But also that when those migrants, women migrants, returned to Nepal, that they had a higher status within the household, lower levels of domestic violence, and therefore there's other secondary effects in terms of contributing to gender equality. Women, of course, also making up more than 50% of the recipients of remittances. Though, of course, the fact that so many women globally are still unbanked in developing countries, that may be an inhibitor to the effect of contributing to gender equality. So we see there that policies on remittances, financial inclusion, gender equality, they really need to go hand in hand and reinforce each other. If we look also at goal 10, then reducing inequality at the national level, this is maybe one of the toughest of all the SDGs to actually realize when we look at the trend of rising inequality that goes back a couple of hundred years, but has really been exacerbated in the era of globalization, as documented very notably by the economist Thomas Piketty a couple of years ago. But most of the effect